So let me introduce you to Marcus Long, the man whose personal loss became the foundation of the UK's first workplace suicide prevention standard. So Marcus, if you could just share a bit of your story as to what led you here and just that moment of clarity that something positive has to come out of this tragedy. When you said that to me the other day, that landed with a real impact. And you went on to recognise that your job was the obvious tool.
So, Martin, as you say, there were two things that brought me to the standard. One deeply personal and the other professional. As you say, back in October 2020, I lost my son, Adam, to suicide. Adam was 21 at the time. And out of that, I'm not quite sure it was instantaneously, but it was very, very quickly. I realised that something positive had to happen out of losing Adam. It took me a very long time to work it out. It took me almost exactly 3 years to work out what that was, which when you hear of the simplicity of it, it will make you wonder why it took me so long. But what I realised is that I didn't want to solve the issue specifically of why Adam had taken his life. This maybe sounds ridiculously noble or something. I wanted no one else to feel the way that Adam felt. That was the answer. I wanted no one else to feel the way that I felt about losing someone to suicide. And that was what fired me, because I knew, and I still know to this very day, in the pit of my stomach, how awful that feels. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I do. I don't want anyone else to feel the way Adam does. So that's where the idea of trying to seek this silver lining came from. As I say, it took me about 3 years to come up with that idea. And it was, like many ideas, simple and staring me in the face all the time. For about the past 20 years, I've worked in the assurance industry. And what the assurance industry does is it creates standards, and then it will do other things with those standards, for example, like auditing people against the standards to make sure that they're conforming to the standard. And what that does is it solves problems. So I very simply thought, if we can solve problems across the huge range of different subjects that standards currently solve, why can't we apply that to suicide? So I started the journey then of talking to a whole range of different people. I talked to people in national standards bodies in different countries around the world. I talked to the International Standards Organization, ISO. I talked to people in the suicide prevention community. I talked to people in business who were affected by it, organizations who were affected by the impact of suicide. And what became very clear is that people were saying, yeah, just feels like anything that can get people thinking on the subject is going to be a positive thing to do. So what we then started doing is we held workshops, we held focus groups with a massive range of different people to say, A, is a standard applicable? B, what will it actually look like? And the enthusiasm for that was just inspiring. It was fabulous, the people that came together to talk about that, as you well know, Martin, from your experience of being involved with that. And then in June 2024, BSI confirmed that they would support the idea of developing the standard, and that was very much the start of the journey. So that's where the whole thing started off, really.
Quite incredible. And the people that I have the privilege of working with and communicating with within the suicide prevention world, post-prevention, prevention, intervention, so much has been born from that personal and tragic loss. And the post-loss growth that we witness is just incredible, absolutely incredible. And yours is literally tangible. But what actually made you believe that the language of standards could change how organizations deal with suicide risk?
I think there was the first thing was standards can be very complicated and people
Yes.
can often find it difficult to get their head around them. Not least, you look at the ISO portfolio, there are thousands of standards in there. So actually, that just
Mm.
becomes bewildering in the first place. So actually, what they're all about, a lot of people, it's one of those things they'll just go, it's too complicated. I don't want to know about it.
Mm.
I've boiled it down to one word, and that word is better. Wherever you are at the moment, the use of a standard, the implementation of a standard will make things better. It doesn't matter whether you are looking at the quality of products. It doesn't matter whether you are trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't matter if you are trying to reduce the number of accidents in the workplace. You look at a standard, a well-made standard, and you implement it, you will make things better. So that was very much the premise of the idea of the standard. The second thing is that standards are built to address all organizations. Clearly, standards can be applicable to certain goods and products and services and things like that, so that only certain organizations will use them. But fundamentally, they're written so anyone can use them. Small organizations, big organizations, multinationals, sole traders, anyone can use those standards. And that then becomes a really powerful thing in terms of the language in which they're written, because they become accessible. Because if they're going to work for everybody, they've got to be accessible for everybody. And that was one of the real drivers behind the standard. We wanted a standard that was easy to get into. It was easy to understand. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a bit so that people can understand the value of what the standard is about. The other side of it is that standards are used by millions of organizations across the globe. So actually, having said that sometimes people find them a bit impenetrable, actually they're not, because that's demonstrated by the fact that there are millions of users. And if we could attach the issue of suicide prevention to a standard, people will go, well, hold on a moment, I haven't thought about suicide prevention before, but I know about standards. Maybe that intersection between the two means that I need to look at this. And what we do is we engage with a new group of people to help us solve the issue of suicide.
It quite literally is one area of risk where most organizations are carrying the risk, whether recognized or not recognized, but it is always generally unmanaged.
Yeah.
To your language, Marcus, knowing the standard like I do, you've put some very unique characteristics into the standard and built them in from the ground up, open, accessible. And you specifically state how applicable it is to the sole trader through to the multi-conglomerate, and it is so accessible, it is so informative, and it is a free standard, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the fabulous things, and I have to thank BSI for doing that, because the vast majority of BSI standards and ISO standards are charged for, fully justifiable, the amount of effort that goes into them. But with this one, BSI decided that it was such a key societal issue that they were addressing that they wanted to have it as a free issue standard. And actually the link through to another free standard that BSI have was actually one of the inspirations. So BSI was was developing a standard for the menopause and menstrual health, and that became an inspiration to this standard in its own right, because again, another subject where not just taboo for some people, but actually to the point where people almost don't want to talk about it at all, or don't even want to accept it exists. And this fitted very much into that. So having the support of it as a free standard is a really fabulous thing. And when you look at what the standard is trying to do, one of the primary things the standard is doing is getting people to not be fearful of talking about the subject, is just to say to people, it exists, it happens, don't be frightened about talking about it. And the standard does some fabulously simple things to help people with that. It has some myth busters in there. So it actually says to people, let's get rid of the nonsense that's talked here, so that it then starts giving people some confidence to go and talk about it. Because we often find that what people will do is they will understand there's a problem, maybe with a colleague or something like that, and they just freeze. They just don't know what to do because they're terrified of saying the wrong thing and they don't know where to go. This standard helps with that. It helps them understand, and then it gives them some tools to start addressing what the specific issues actually are.
So it doesn't just open the door, it starts the conversation, and it then gives you tools and skills and knowledge and confidence to, carry on. Fantastic. You've often said, Marcus, that organisations already manage many risks through structured frameworks. When you look at suicide in the workplace, what do most organisations misunderstand about the risk that they are carrying?
I maybe think of it slightly differently. I'm not sure they misunderstand. I just don't think they know. I just don't think they've ever thought about it. I don't think they've ever gone, I have this risk. Within my organisation is this risk. And actually, I'm the living example of that. I didn't know that Adam faced the problems that he was facing until it was too late. It was as simple as that. And so I didn't know that I needed to help him. And I think that you can then ramp that up so much more level of magnitude when it comes to organisations, because organisations can have many employees, can have people using the services, can have supply chains, and all of those things. They don't know what the risk is because they don't know everybody. They don't know what's going on in people's lives. And it's one of those important things that suicide is not just a mental health issue. It is about what's happening in people's lives as well. It's the stresses in people's lives, the financial position they're in, the personal relationships, their employment situation. All of those things become the stressors that can actually take people to suicidal thoughts. And so organisations don't necessarily know they have this risk. However, when you multiply it up and you look at the statistics with over 7,000 suicides in the UK and over 750,000 across the globe each year, you start to realise that an organisation is probably carrying a risk. And it might be dirty for some people to talk about it, but that risk can be a financial risk for people, because if they have people who have suicidal thoughts, maybe even make an attempt on their life, or maybe in fact even die through suicide, that will then have a massive impact on that organisation. And I know it's dirty to talk about it, but if we're going to get organisations to wake up to how they can contribute to this, maybe one way we can tell them is you are reducing your financial risk by looking at this standard and seeing at how it can actually help you out.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we use any approach we can, sensitively, of course, to get that message across. But there is a bottom line, and the government have put that, I think it's £1.35 million per suicide.
That's right.
Of attributable cost. And then the ripple effect obviously amplifies that as well. Yeah. Thank you. So policing is a profession where people repeatedly encounter trauma, but the culture can still make it difficult to ask for help. From your perspective, Marcus, what does a leadership framework like BS 3480 add to an organisation like the Met, for example?
I think there are a couple of things linking in with what we've talked about before. First of all, to a group like the Met, something like a standard is something that is very easily understood.
Yes.
They work on policies and procedures and standards and ways of doing things. So actually, the concept of a standard, we're over the first hurdle already. Because when we say here is a standard to help with suicide prevention, we don't have to battle all those, well, what's it are you talking about? We can actually plug straight into how their systems work already, how they work as an organisation. I think then secondly, what the standard does is at a very basic level, this kind of sounds a bit weird, it just exists. It exists and says, here are some solutions for you. And so suddenly people are going, all right, okay, let's talk about this subject then. If someone's taken the effort to put a standard together, then we need to have a look at that and understand what that's all about. And when you then understand the whole standards development process that BSI go through, and you realize that you have the richest, diverse group of people writing that standard. People from business, people from the healthcare system, people from academia, people with lived experience of suicide. A whole range of different people then come together, and so people can have faith in what that standard is about. I think the third thing it does is it then actually opens the communication channels, because what we're saying is, here are some tools, here are some answers, here are some ideas about what you can do. And then hopefully takes away the fear that we talked about before of talking about the subject. It takes away the taboo nature of it. And I think particularly with an organisation like the Met, that more than probably the vast majority of organisations actually experiences suicide, understands it to a level way beyond what anyone else can understand it, both from the perspective of coming across it in their day-to-day work, and also regrettably what it does to the people that are working there as well. So I think it's really about saying, here is a tool. Here's an honest, open, easy to use tool. And the really important thing about the standard is it may look a bit daunting to start with, but actually it just asks people some very simple questions that say, what is your problem relating to suicide? Because we've got lots of different answers in here. If it's the need for you to develop a whole strategy on it, the standard will help you. If it's one particular